Hello. We're going to call the meeting to order. We're going to do the roll call, salute the flags, and go over the consent agenda and the minutes, and then we'll have a continued public hearing. And before we start that, I want to go over some stuff first. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry.
No.
All right. Should I start over? We're going to call the meeting to order now and call the roll, do the flag salute, go over the consent agenda, approve the minutes. Then we'll go to the regular agenda, which is a continuation of the hearing that we had last month. And I'm going to talk a little bit about quasi-judicial hearings and what the Planning Commission does. So let's call the roll.
Commissioner McCarty?
Here.
Commissioner Natalie Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Malachi?
Here.
Commissioner Poole?
Here.
Commissioner Wentz?
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Smith?
Here.
Chair Rowlett?
Here. Let's salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we're going to review the minutes of the last meeting.
I would like to point out the end of the meeting, there was a discussion about the City Council Transportation System Plan joint session. I believe that's been moved.
Yes, that's been moved to June 27th.
Commissioners?
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes.
Second.
Call roll.
Commissioner McCarty?
Yes.
Commissioner Natalie Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Malachi?
Yes.
Commissioner Poole?
Yes.
Commissioner Wentz?
Yes.
Commissioner Patrick Smith?
Yes.
Chair Rowlett?
Yes. Since we're continuing the public hearing, there's like some procedure stuff that I want to go over even though we may not need to. Is that okay, David?
Just fine.
Normally what we would get is a planning department report, applicant testimony, proponent testimony, opponent testimony, applicant rebuttal, decision to continue or close the hearing, commission discussion, and decision. So right now I'm going to ask about ex parte contact, which is one of the things that we normally do. So does any commission member wish to disqualify himself or herself for any personal or financial interest in this matter before us tonight? Or does any commission member wish to report any significant ex parte or pre-hearing contacts? Please indicate if you visited the site in connection with this application. Let's start down then and just work our way down.
I'll give you a copy. Commissioner McCarty, I visited the websites relating to, or several websites relating to state land use, county land use, metro, and the GMC, Gladstone Municipal Code. I visited and walked the following sites in the property at 1180 Beatrice. I walked as much as I could on the Olson wetlands and looked at the intake going into Rynearson Creek. And I walked part of Rynearson Creek as well, where the outflow was. I also went to the GIS website on Gladstone and reviewed the 2008 flood base, the floodway, 10-year floodplain, and the 500-year the 100-year floodplain and the 500-year floodplain. The areas that were subject to slides, slopes greater than 25%. And I also found a YouTube video on the Olson wetland for Friends of the Property. I watched that.
Yes, I have visited this site.
I revisited the site, and I also talked to Jake outside the new entrance that they're proposing for the walking path.
And I went and visited the site today. I looked at the property. I did not go past the gate and walk the property. And I've had ex parte contact. I talked to Dennis McCarty today about procedural things, Councilor McCarty. I talked to Jackie Betts about procedures, meetings, and, you know, people that have requested certain things. I talked to Tammy Bannock earlier today about procedural things, and Brian Early about procedure, presentations, time. I did not discuss specifically anything to do with this application for design review. And I feel that I don't have any bias that would prevent me from making an unbiased decision in this matter.
I revisited the site yesterday, and I did go back and looked at Title 13 and revisited in my own mind, looked at the LCDC goals just to remember what I need to know. And again, I visited the site originally, so I've been there twice now.
Well, I have no biases, and all I've done is drive by, but I didn't go on because I didn't want to trespass on private property. So.
Hi, Commissioner Smith. I have visited the property multiple times. I do need to disclose an ex parte conversation with a former city councilman who I ran into in a public place. And he informed me he was a resident of the neighborhood, and I didn't give him any of my personal opinions or feelings about it, and feel I don't have any biases that would keep me from making a fair decision in this matter.
Good. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the right of any commission member to hear this matter? Is there any member of the audience who wishes to question the jurisdiction of this body on behalf of this body to act on behalf of the City Council on this matter? Oregon land use laws require that all issues be raised if the issues are to be appealed. Failure to raise the issues at this hearing may invalidate their further appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA. Any party has a right to request a continuance of this hearing, or an alternative to have the record left open for 7 days. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the Commission to respond to this issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. If you're going to testify, please try to address the applicable criteria. Any questions about that part?
Chair Roulette, if I may, just one point on the matter in the script that you read about a continuance. That only applies, the right to a continuance only applies to the hearing, the first hearing, the one you had last month. And the reason for that is because you have that right on the one hand. You also, the applicant, any applicant has a right to have their application processed by the city within 120 days. So those two things that the law kind of recognizes will give people a right to ask for a continuance at the initial public hearing, the first time Planning Commission hears it. That said, I think it's something we'll need to talk about either at the talk about now. I think maybe more likely and more appropriate to talk about it at the end of tonight's hearing. There has been obviously a lot of written testimony that's come in, several pieces of additional testimony today. And one of the things that I thought we could explore at some point is, in lieu of just continuing the hearing to your next month, leaving the record open as you described in the script and allowing for people to submit written testimony, allowing the applicant a chance to have a final sort of say on that, and then at your next meeting presenting that, no more hearing, but presenting that full record, which staff can summarize to the commission.
So if we made a decision tonight, we'd leave the record open?
You wouldn't make a decision if you leave the record open.
Okay.
You'd be waiting to get additional testimony.
So any new material that's been submitted, that would give them a right to be a party to any other appeal then, besides closing the public hearing?
Anybody that wanted to participate during that open record period would have the right to continue to participate if the matter were appealed. Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to go over a little bit about what this hearing is and what kind of hearing this is. I've seen a lot of stuff that's submitted that makes me think that some people may think this is a hearing where we can actually change the law or do some things that we're not able to do. So what I'm going to do is read some of the things from the State of Oregon Guide for Land Use Planning so that you understand a little bit about what kind of a hearing this is. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. A quasi-judicial hearing is a type of land use proceeding in which the decision maker addresses a narrow land use issue, normally related to one of a limited number of parcels, and apply existing criteria. Typical variance, conditional use permit, and zone change hearings are all quasi-judicial. They are generally initiated by an applicant. Appeals of an administrative decision on these types of applications are also quasi-judicial. That's the type of hearing that we're having tonight. It's quasi-judicial as opposed to a legislative hearing in which some laws could be changed, zone changes, that type of thing. That's not what we're here for tonight. We're here to look at a specific application and design review. Let's say the hearing, at the start of the hearing, the chairperson or designee announces the nature of the hearing, which we've done. Ex parte contact, which we've done. Conflicts, so forth. The chairperson must advise the audience of the provisions of ORS 197.763, including statements that testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the criteria, and failure to raise issues may preclude DELUBE, a thing which we discussed earlier. The normal hearing begins with a staff report, which we've already had, and I think that we'll probably hear some more staff type report as we go. So the normal hearing begins with a staff report followed by the proponent's case, the opponent's case, and rebuttal from the applicant if necessary. Public agencies wishing to comment may follow. The public hearing is then closed, which it is not. The public hearing is still open from last month, and the matter goes to deliberation. That's what we do here. The decision-making body has essentially three options. Make a decision with findings documenting how the application satisfied or did not satisfy appropriate criteria. Determine that there is not enough information to make a decision and continue the hearing to a specified date and time, which we've done, or schedule deliberations for a specific date and time. So that part, what do you think about that, David?
Well, as I said, Matt, if you want me to sort of get into this a little bit more right now, I certainly can. When you have hearings such as this one where there's obviously a lot of interest, there's a lot of testimony, both written and oral, in our experience, my personal experience, our office's experience, it really does make some sense, and again, in trying to be fair to everybody, allowing people to speak to their concerns, but also allowing the applicant some finality one way or the other. So what I would suggest doing is having tonight, as you suggested, Chair, maybe getting an update from Clay, and then hearing additional testimony. I would say start with the applicant. Anything more the applicant wants to add for tonight. Additional public testimony, both pro, both con, so those in favor, those against. Here again, as just a matter of right, the applicant always gets rebuttal, sort of the final word for tonight's purposes. And then my suggestion would be to leave the record open for a period of 21 days. That'll be broken up into 7-day segments. And I think it'd probably be better for everybody for me to get into the specifics of that at the end of the hearing tonight, because they're just details that I think no one's going to remember if I talk about it right now. But essentially, at the end of that 21-day period, the record would be closed. So no additional testimony would come before the Planning Commission, either in writing or orally. You would reconvene, presumably at your July meeting. And at that point, you would have your deliberation, as you described in that document.
Okay.
And you would just make a decision based on the record and the testimony.
Okay.
The reason for that, again, is as I mentioned, there's a deadline, and it's, what is it, August 18th or 17th?
16th.
The city has to have a final written decision unless the applicant extends that time period by August 16th.
Okay.
And that includes any appeal that might happen to the city council. So.
And then to continue, if the hearing or deliberations are continued to a specific date and time, is kind of what we just talked about, what we want to do, or may do, I should say. ORS 197.763 includes specific rights regarding who may ask for a continuance or for the record to be left open, and we're going to leave the record open if we do continue to another date for deliberation. Findings, that's the part that the commission, need to do. There are entire books written preparing factor for decisions. Essentially, what needs to be done in any quasi-judicial land use case is to make findings to support the decision. Basic facts need to be facts such as who, what, when, where, and why. The review criteria needs to be spelled out, and findings evaluating whether the proposal complies with the new criteria, and etc. These do not have to be lengthy documents in legal jargon. They need to be simply state how the facts of the situation relate to the review criteria. These findings need to be included in the files as part of the hearing body's decision. For variances and conditional use permits, such as sample exhibits, which are part of this document, is all that's needed. For zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan amendments, an ordinance approved by the city council or commissioners is required. So that's the legislative part. Then they go on to talk about signing up, which we've done, and keep the hearing focused on what we're here to look at is a design review of an applicant who wants to build some structures. Final decision. A final decision is made by the Planning Commission or Council Board that stands unless appealed. The decision must be in writing and signed by the appropriate city or county official. So that's, at that point when we get to making our decision in August, correct?
Well, presumably July, right?
Or now.
Sorry?
Or now. Why are we here if it's in August? You can make it now.
Gives people more time to send stuff in, essentially.
But it is possible to make a decision tonight, is that correct?
Yeah, you're not compelled to, but you want to make sure one of the things that you're getting into is, as you described, is making sure you have a decision that goes through what people have said, responds to that which is relevant. So it's up to you, but in my experience, when you've got this volume of testimony, you're going to get more tonight, presumably. it's good to make sure you've seen all that, making a fully informed decision.
And then to answer a question about decisions, once a final decision has been made, a written notice of decision must be mailed to the applicant, all parties at the public hearing, and those who requested it, in case of a comprehensive plan, which we're not doing. Appeals. The zoning ordinance has an appeal process, and we're not looking at zoning ordinances, but whatever decision we make as a planning commission can be appealed to city council. Then they go through the process of a public hearing and make a decision. That decision, whichever way it goes, can be appealed again by parties at the city council level to the LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. They make the final decision, and what decision they make stands. So this whole procedure that we're having here tonight is design review. The Planning Commission, hopefully, is going to make a decision either tonight or in July. And I think we said July to leave the record open in case other people want to submit documents or things for the record. Then that decision can be appealed to the City Council. The City Council decision can be appealed to the state. So I hope that helps a little bit. It doesn't help you, sir? What is it that you don't understand?
You've had the same tune every meeting.
And what tune would that be?
Not hearing what your constituents are saying.
Okay.
That's simple. You're part of this community. Listen to us.
We are, and the thing I guess you don't understand is what we have as a body, what our job is. We can't change any laws here, change any zones.
I'm not asking you.
Okay. So let's go ahead and continue with the public hearing. And you thought the best place to start would be with the applicant?
Well, I think actually just
Clay.
if staff has any additional comments they want to make about where we are.
Well, what I'm trying to do now is get caught up on all this stuff that was just submitted. That's not going to happen. So let me just briefly remind everybody why we're here. I think we know why we're here. You certainly know why you're here.
I know why.
But just so everybody else knows, this is a design review application for an apartment complex. Multiple apartments in a zone that's called MR, multifamily residential. The proposal as presented is allowed outright in the MR zone, subject to this design review process. Design review gives you an opportunity to make sure the zone, excuse me, and other development standards are met, such as building height, building materials, setbacks, parking requirements, circulation, that kind of thing. We had a hearing last month. There were a lot of people here last month, more than tonight. Took in a lot of testimony. Then there was kind of a lull until about Monday of this week, yesterday, when I was suddenly buried with a bunch more stuff that I haven't had a chance to read, not all of which is in opposition. A lot of it was just submitted to me this evening, so I have no way to comment on it. You have no way to even consider it
We've had
this
those
evening.
documents other than one tonight that's new. The rest we've had for a couple of days.
I've
You may
got
not
three.
have
I've
read
got
them, but they
three
were sent
since I've
to
been
us.
sitting here, though. Just that,
Do the
for
same.
instance, I got a petition that came in and a couple of other pieces of info. But I'm going to be brief because everybody took time out of their evening to be here. We all know why we're here. So I suggest we just continue on with the public hearing, and I'm here to answer questions if you have them.
So I do want to bring up something that Randy Thomas submitted, specifically for staff. And we don't have Jim Wynot here tonight, do we?
I don't think so.
No. Okay, so Randy on page 237 in the packet had commented about the extension that Public Works had mandated and about the notification not being extended.
Okay, I'm not finding what you're talking about, but give me just 1 second and I
Page
will.
237.
This packet might be
In the
different.
In the book.
Oh, and I didn't,
Yeah, 237.
okay, on page 2-37, I'm looking at a letter here.
Yeah, right about the middle where it starts during the rebuttal. Mr. Thomas.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, my bad. I'm sorry. I am sorry.
For that.
Down there.
Is it during the rebuttal?
I think so.
The applicant responded in Public Works, okay. Yeah, and we did receive, and I think you folks got copies, we did receive email response from Jim Wynot. Do you want me to read that?
So my question is when the things are mandated that we add, this isn't the only time this has happened, right? We've mandated connections through on other files as well. Do we, at that point, if we've already done notification or anything, do we then re-notify based on the new extended area?
In this particular
This case
situation where
specifically, but in general
you're
as well.
making a connection between two properties?
Yeah.
No.
Is that something we could start doing?
Well, this is something that's done at the time those paths, those walkways are originally done. For instance, you've got a bike path map. Whenever there's a development, you don't notify each property that there's a bike path that's going to be out in the street in front of their property, because that planning process already occurred.
Right, but if during the pre-application process, whether it's planning or Public Works, if we're mandating that they add a through street or they add a walking path through there or they add some development that connects another area, is it possible for us to extend the notification to the people who will now be affected that weren't before?
So then you're talking about when the subsequent application comes in after the pre-application meeting.
Well, yeah, so the people can be here, so they'll be notified that they're now affected.
Okay, but that's, yes, if you would like, it would be easy to miss people. Particularly, I'm just thinking of a bike path along Clackamas Boulevard, which extends the entire length of Clackamas Boulevard, for instance. And if we get development coming in that impacts part of that bike path, and it's going to open up part of it, for instance, that could be a lot of properties that we may or may not be able to get all of. I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely clear on who would need to be notified.
Well, an
I just want to make
example-
sure everybody is notified who needs to be.
An example would be that church property that came in for subdivision off of
Right.
Glen Echo. We're going to open a whole new road
Right.
through there. That's going to be creating little, vehicle and pedestrian traffic on either end.
Yeah.
Those neighbors got notified because the property boundaries itself went all the way up to those other properties. I see what you're saying, and we will do what we can to ensure everybody who might be impacted knows.
And I was hoping if we can pass along to Jim to encourage that we keep that communication open so that if they're going to request something like that, we even re-notify if necessary for whoever's going to start being affected.
Okay, I'll make a note, and I know Tammy is writing that down. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioners? Anything else on the...
I have a question. At the last meeting, it was said that you were going to discuss lowering the levels of the buildings from 3 stories to 2 stories. But I haven't seen an elevation diagram that indicates how that's going to relate to the rest of the neighborhood that it adjoins to.
Yeah, and there were multiple requests, I think, made at the last hearing on this from members of the audience to get some kind of clue on what that would look like, to get some kind of, not a photo necessarily, but some kind of computer generation of what it would look like. And I'm going to leave that up to the applicant with his presentation. Yeah.
Shall we start the public hearing? So, Tammy, I think probably the best thing is to start,
You're going to start the applicant, right?
I thought we were going to do that last. We're doing the applicant first or last?
Applicant first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Applicant first and last.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Can you restate your name for the record, please?
You bet. Casey Cutting. And I have a drawing that Mr. Smith spoke of for both the audience and the commissioners.
So this is all new stuff then?
Well, here. the elevations and then a diagram which I will explain.
Okay. And make sure Tammy gets a copy of that too, or sees it at least.
No, I totally understand. Thank you very much.
You guys get one down there?
No, he'll be back.
We have enough? We can share
We
over
can
here.
share one if we need to.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead and give your name and address.
Yes, Casey Cutting.
And your address, too, please.
My address is P.O. Box 2913, Wilsonville, Oregon. So the request at the last meeting talked about a depiction of how the property would sit in relation to the street and the view. And if you look on the upper section of the upper section of the drawing depicts the front elevations of the proposed structures in the project, and the lower drawing is, if you look to the far left, there's a figure of a person standing on the far side of Beatrice Avenue away from the project, and the house depicted is at 1210 Beatrice Avenue, and the yellow highlighted dotted line shows the line of sight that would be visible if a person were standing. So if they were standing on the far side of Beatrice, directly in front of the house at 1210 Beatrice, you wouldn't be able to see the structures behind it. If you were standing and looking off to the side at the gutter level, there's a second highlighted line where you would see the top 4 to 5 feet of the buildings closest to Beatrice. As the property slopes away from both Beatrice and Abernathy Court, and so there's really, because they're two-story buildings, and if you look at right behind the house, there's a typical 6-foot fence that's proposed, and right at that fence is the property line where my property starts, and our plan is to drop the grade. If you'll notice, there's a dotted line which shows the existing grade, and we're planning on dropping the grade slightly, about 3 to 4 feet, in order to bring the interior grade of the parking area to meet the fire marshal's request of an 8% grade for fire access. And so the buildings will be lowered 3 to 4 feet. So from, if you were to look, there's a third line of sight that I did not highlight, but if you were to look over that fence off to the side of the houses on Beatrice, you would see the top, maybe the top story of the two-story building. And so this drawing is just shown to depict that since the property slopes away, it won't be like the Webster Road apartments. It's not even remotely the same. It's not apples for apples at all. This is going to be a visually low impact project, and each building will effectively look like a house rather than an apartment building.
Mr. Cutting, how about from Abernathy Court?
Abernathy Court.
What would the view look like from there?
From Abernathy Court, the property also slopes away from Abernathy Court, and so you're going to just see the tops of the buildings as well. So if you were out on Abernathy, I'm not sure, I don't have the depiction drawn of that, but I don't know that there's going to be much visible. And it's only a 40-foot wide street, so you'd almost have to be standing right in the middle of that section to see anything.
Were you given a copy of the, or have you looked through the notes that were sent to us over the last month?
I was not given anything, no.
Okay.
Questions? Well,
So one of the documents that were provided to us was talking about the sewer and the water for that property. And when you talked to Public Works, what did they say to you regarding the sewer and water connections for the number of buildings that you're going to be providing?
So there's a in the public right-of-way that would be on the closest to, I believe it is at Windsor Court. Is that the name of the street adjacent? I believe there's a sanitary sewer line that's a 12-inch line that runs through Windsor Court and down through the public right-of-way that is right at the bottom corner of my property, and then it goes through the wetland out, I'm assuming towards Hereford, and in the pre-application meeting with 3 or 4 or 5 of the Public Works guys, Mr. Glasgow, Marshall Funk, and I think that was it. They said that there was no problem with the capacity and the ability to tie into that storm sewer line, and the water would come from, there's a water main that comes down Abernathy Court and potentially might have to, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I think there was some talk about possibly having the water line looped over to Windsor Court, so that but I'm not totally positive about that. But I know that they had no concern over the capacity on the water system either.
This elevation that you've got on here of the street level, 227 feet. I'm just looking at your drawing here on the left there.
Yes, that is, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's
an arbitrary number.
I believe that's 227 feet above sea level.
Well, the topographical map there says it's 90. And it
okay,
drops off
well
30
then,
feet to the right over 300. I'm just asking, so I want to clarify.
I could get back to you. I know that when this was drawn, there.
I've got a topographical map if you'd like to see it.
Okay, I just know that there was 2 maps that the draftsman used on this. There was one, a topo map from Centerline Concept Surveying, and the other one he consulted was, I think, the city map, and that 227 number, I'm not a surveyor, so I don't know for sure, but I'd have to get back to you.
When I did a review of the Olson wetlands,
okay,
the lowest point in the wetlands is 60 feet above sea level.
Okay.
The highest point up here, when you do the first piece of property right at that driveway where the 2-story house is,
okay,
the grade level right there is 90 feet. And then when you get back to where your property starts, it drops down to 80 feet. But it changes depending on how far back in you go, of course.
Okay.
And so I was wondering how that came out. I mean, if it's all relative, then this line of sight would be pertinent either way. I'm just wanting to clarify what you had. I'm just saying that property back there has 2 severe drop-offs, and I wondered what grade this first building, the one that you're looking over, with the gable roof.
Yes.
Because with the 2-story you have gable roof, and you're not going to do the 3-story with the
I'm not doing any
roof.
3 stories. I'm not proposing any 3 stories.
Well, it was on the original.
Originally, yes.
So, looking at this drawing, it looks like that first unit is at the same level as the street where it enters into Abernathy Court, the wood. This is Beatrice, so it's off to the side. So we're looking at you're looking at it from east to west.
Yeah.
You're looking at a west elevation here, and I'm saying, I was concerned about the roadway going down in there. Mr. Funk was talking to about, and if you look on the GIS site, there's a ridge that runs across there where those houses are. If you're going parallel to Abernathy.
Okay.
That's. Let me pull up a map. Just give me a second here.
Okay.
That's probably a good one, right? Not very big, but blow it up. And I can't see it from here, but can I walk down there? Can I walk over there? Sure. From your perspective on your drawing, you're standing here.
Correct.
Looking this way.
Correct.
And what I'm talking about is this ridge line right along there. This is a ridge. This is higher property than this. See this down here?
Okay.
That is 60 feet above sea level. It goes all the way up to 90 feet. This is very steep coming down here. These lines, when I soldered it out, they're 2 foot.
2 foot increments, yeah.
So it's 2. What that means is every 2 foot of elevation drop. So when they're closer together, it's very steep. And when they're further apart, like here, that's still a 2 foot drop, but it's over. Well, in this case, what I did is total distance across that piece of property to your corner here is, and this is using the measurement tool that's on the GIS site, is 240 feet. And to give you an example of what the concern is, here's Windsor Drive, and if you started where the 2 houses are, again, this is a 2-story house, split level, or it's a tri-level, I guess, and they both sit down into the ground a ways, but where this line starts right there, that's at 80 feet in, and this is total to the property, 21 feet, it drops 10 feet, so it's a top. This is really clear. So this makes this kind of a bowl down in here, which is where the runoff always comes to the open wetland. But it's fairly flat by the time you get there. And so my concern, and I've got pictures if you want to see them. Slide up here, walk through. But this is a 2-story house. This one's a 2-story house. If you're out here at that point, if you took a picture this way, you can't see anything behind here unless I didn't know what grade, because your buildings go right along here, one setback.
The corner of the property or the street is right there, the building will sit right here.
Right, but see, they're at 90 feet, and my point is, how far down are you going to cut this?
About 2, 3, 4 feet.
So the walk wall you're showing is really just
Not a 4 foot wall.
Okay, so the point being is, you can't see from this house, this area, from this house, this house, this house, this house, and this house, you can't see those on a 2-story layout.
Correct.
And if you go down in here, and the rest of your buildings are basically down here,
They're even farther.
they're even farther down, and this is 2-story, and this is 2 level. Coming down this, you can't see it at all. I'm actually going to clarify that.
Thank you for that. And my point with this map is very helpful is that from Beatrice, in front of, this is the 1-story house, this is the 2-story house. You won't be able to see anything over this house.
Oh.
Oops.
Nope.
So really and there's going to be a 6-foot fence here, and then it will also be dropped down with a 3 to 4 foot rock wall along this property line, and so you're only going to be able to see the top 6 or 8 feet likely of the buildings that are right here, and only through the peekaboo view through between these 2 properties.
Right.
and maybe through here, but doubtful because I believe there's some trees right in here.
There's also a row of trees along here. This is all arbor bottom. But these have larger trees along this ridge line, which is where you're going to put the road down.
Right.
If there was any way to save some of those trees, I'm sure it would help.
So can you clarify, so where the road coming in for the driveway, and you had stated that they would not be able to see anything from there. It seems like it's going to be a very steep road if they're not going to be able to see anything.
That's kind of my point.
Right? Coming up a very steep road seems a bit dangerous, right?
See, it's steeper than what it appears to be on this drawing. That's kind of my point. Can you go down to the...
How steep is the road going to be for people coming from where it currently is down onto the property?
It is, Mr. Funk requested that ideally 8% grade would be his ideal in certain situations, possibly up to 11 if I remember correctly, 11% grade, and until we get the full-blown topo map and the engineer gets working on the site design.
And what is the grade today?
Well, yeah.
I did a sketch.
Okay.
And I used the actual topographical elevation.
Perfect.
So this is a little out of proportion because this is actually going to be a lot wider. But over this distance right here, it's not. So when you come, this is part of my handwriting up here, but up here where Abernathy Court comes in, where you'd make the turn to go down the hill. See, it drops. What you're basically looking at is these are 10-foot increments of elevation, okay, and over distance. And over the distance that's right here, it's about 80, 90 feet. No, it's longer than that, clear to the property line. It's closer. It's 27.5 feet horizontally. It drops 10 feet right here alone. And so if you were to take and cut the property in half and stand and look at the property, through the hillside, and you see these two houses sitting up here that are on either side of Abernathy Court, with Beatrice coming this way, if you could stand in there and look, this is more what it looks like, where this may go out a little more gradual, a little further. But you see, this is the part here. The overall grade might represent a satisfactory grade for the fire department, but I'm really concerned about being able to make that turn coming out here, turning and going down, and then it drops so fast at the first part of it.
When we get into the engineering, it's potential that we might have to do a 4-foot rock wall, go about 3 feet, and do another 4-foot rock wall, retaining wall. There's enough room behind the building, so it might actually be dropped down even further until I get the full topo maps and the engineer starts working on it. That could very well could happen.
Well, one of the design review process would have addressed all of that. That the state requires, the DSL and the Department of Lands requires for design review, and also in Chapter 17. But it's very hard to visualize for most people to see what that is. And I went out and I walked it, and I know you've walked it many times. So it's a lot steeper than you realize. And as you go, if you look at the map itself, if north is at the top, which it generally is, and you come back, you've only got about, I'm guessing, 30, 40 feet maximum before it drops down in and creates that bowl.
Right.
And my concern was, how are you going to get that road down there and without dropping the elevation of the buildings themselves to lower the grade percentage?
So I've walked the property with my excavating contractor, and as you mentioned, it does have slope to it, and the idea would be to do what's called a cut and fill, where you take the high spot out at the property line and drop that down, at the same time raising up the lower buildings, either by crushed concrete or crushed gravel to build them up, or taller foundation walls, and then take the dirt from the higher spot and backfill around the taller foundation walls, so that it takes the impact out of it.
Right. I was just concerned that
he would be able to get his vehicles down there
Right.
and make the turn at the top and make the turn at the bottom.
Right, right, and we discussed that in the pre-application meeting. That's going to be a problem for the engineer to figure out, to coordinate the grade to make the fire access proper.
So the two things I want to bring up about this. So one, the problem for me isn't how steep it is going down the hill. It's how fast people will go to get up the hill and potentially have somebody standing at the top of the hill. That's my bigger concern. But the other part is the grades you're showing us. If you're saying that they're going to have to cut and fill this, are these grades even accurate for what it's going to look like, say, from that street? Because you're telling me that they're going to have to raise that level in order to make that an acceptable grade, which is going to raise the houses, right? Which is going to make them more visible from that road, right?
Well, the lower ones are so far below the line of sight that
Currently,
they're
but not if you
inconsequential.
fill, though, right?
But we're talking about, as he mentioned, we're talking 25, 30 feet. We're not going to fill that much. We're taking the top ones down and at the same time raising the lower ones to make the site more level, and in effect creating a grade that works for the fire department and also ease of access for everybody.
So what do you envision the grade of the driveway being when it's completed at the entrance to your property?
Ideally, we'd want to meet the 8% that Fire Marshal Funk requested, and if that would be the goal to shoot for.
So, based on what I'm seeing here, right, how much would you have to fill to make that 8% possible?
I don't know. We're going to drop the top down, so by dropping the top and raising the bottom.
But you're not able to drop the top at the entrance, right? Because that's where the houses are currently, right?
Yeah. Could we go back to the previous drawing?
One.
Okay. So the driveway's coming down here and is going to incorporate a little bit of the road easement that's already existing and then loop through the project like this. So there's proposed buildings that are right through here. These are the ones that are going to be dropped down. And then this lower section will be the part that's raised up. So the grade will be, in effect, lifted on the bottom and dropped down on the top. And that's a question for the engineer. He's going to have to calculate it all, and there'll be some coordination with the fire department and Public Works and so on to make everybody happy.
Questions?
If I could just add one more thing to that too, is that ultimately, you know, if the fire department is not happy with it, then it's going to get the veto stamp, and then it's going back to the drawing board until it works to meet the satisfaction of the Public Works and the fire department.
So a lot of the testimony that was provided to us over the last month has been around the wetlands and the environmental impact on that. And I know last month you showed us how you plan to do some of the stormwater drainage. But can you talk a little bit about the boundaries in relation to the wetland, the boundaries of your development in relation to the wetland?
Well, the maps that I've looked at and the consulting that I've done with the county that the wetland is not on my property, nor is the 50-foot buffer on my property, or the buffer, I guess would be, I don't know exactly the width of the buffer, but I was told that the buffer's also not on my property, and so the storm water system is going to be designed to effectively not allow any more water off of the site than is currently going off of it. That's the big rule of thumb. And there's again, I'm deferring to my engineer, because the engineer has to design the system. There will probably be a combination of an underground storage retention system, and then that will go through in the binder. I believe it's on the tab number 6. It shows basically what's been adopted by the city of Gladstone, where the water is filtered through effectively a ditch with some plantings in it, and that's supposed to clean the water before it gets into the wetland. And that's going to be inspected by different bodies. I believe Water Environment Services is going to be involved. I'm not positive, but I think DEQ might be involved in that, as well as the city.
Did you have a report here for us on the boundary thing that you were talking about?
I do not. I was told that there's no the wetland nor the buffer were on my property, so in my mind it was a non-issue.
So is that something we have access to?
Well, what I can tell you for a fact is that in the Department of Lands, they require, because it is a wetland, and I do have the Title 13 map here, which shows a slightly different shape to it, but it stays within the borders of what's up there for the wetlands. But the Department of State Lands requires that you actually provide a delineation report and plan to prove that it's not there by going out and actually marking the land before you turn a screw or stick, throw a shovel in the ground. That report should have already, it's recommended by the State Department of Lands that report would be done before we even having this conversation. In fact, that's one of my basic concerns, is there's 2 or 3 reports that needed to be done that actually prove this stuff where it's at. I mean, we're being asked to consider whether or not to approve a permit with not all the information, and it's not mandatory that that's done ahead of time, but it makes it more difficult for us to make a decision based on what we're seeing. So without the delineation report, is that right, Council? The delineation report? It's not a requirement, but it's one of the things that should...
the state would ultimately, if it's a jurisdictional wetland, I mean, that I don't know, but the state would ultimately require it, but you're right, it does not need to be done before you consider it.
But it does make it more difficult without, is my point.
Can I, Commissioner McCarty, can I make a few brief comments on that? There's a lot of mixing and matching going on here. Wetlands have nothing to do with Title 13, except coincidentally in this case. Title 13 is a chapter of Metro's functional plan. It deals with habitat. Title 3 of Metro's functional plans deals specifically with wetland. So if you're looking at wetlands, it would be Title 3.
I have Title 3. I was talking to the wetlands when I was talking Title 3. I was talking about the...
Okay, and in this case, because I mentioned coincidentally, because this is a Title 3 wetland and a Title 13 habitat. Now, the boundaries are not exact, but they're pretty darn close. Title 3 is represented in your code as Chapter 17.27. Title 13 is 17.25. Yes. Those chapters are both compliant with Metro's functional plan. By implementing .25 and .27 of your code, you're in effect implementing Metro's plan for them. And in this case, with a habitat, it is mapped as being off the property. Now there's a couple of options that can happen here, and those options are up to the applicant. Typically the option taken is option A, which is accept the map as drawn, because in this case the map as drawn shows the habitat area as being off the property. With Title 3 wetlands, it's a little bit different. You've got a delineated wetland, you've got a minimum buffer of 50 feet, neither of which are on this property, by the way, they're on the adjoining property. And then there's additional distance added based on slope. An example with that would be when we did the big box that's going up on Arlington, the 24-hour, yeah, or the Walgreens site with that coffee thing. The setbacks from the Clackamas River, because of slope, becomes extensive. The buffer to the water resource. In that case, it's not a wetland, but it's still a Title III water resource. A wetland is typically there because it's flat, and so you don't get the extra distance because of the slope. So you've got the mapped wetland and you've got a buffer. In this case, neither of those are on the subject property, and there's no requirement then through your code or through Metro's to do any additional mapping of that wetland. It's already been done. Now, Division of State Lands is a different animal. That's a state agency that you have no direct control over. And it would be my suggestion that since it complies with your code and Metro's functional plan, do not try to, don't try to do DSL's work for them. Make it a condition.
And that's what would typically happen, is you'd have a condition that would say, any and all state permits must be obtained before, even grading would begin generally.
Well, yeah, 17.8 CMC requires a design review, but the state of, I understand what you're saying about not getting the state involved in it. I'm saying it can fall back. What it says is if, for example, we don't ask him to provide it, and someone challenges it, and they go to the state level, they can come back and say to us, we need to provide that to them to prove that it's not. You say it's not, but there are no markings out there to prove that it's not, and no one's shot anything on there. The property lines where the wetlands are not consistent with where the wetlands physically are. That's what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Title III shows that it's not on there.
That is an inventoried wetland, and it's the best information you have. It's based on hydric soils and plant type. It is very well defined. If you make a condition that DSL, do whatever they do, DSL may require a, further site delineation.
That's what I was saying.
Delineation, and that's fine, but that is a different agency, right? You
We'd
guys
end
are
up
completely
paying
out
for
of it. What?
We end up paying for it?
No, that's the applicant.
So you want to make a note for that?
If you approve
Make a
it, it's the
condition?
way it is, and it's different. After the fact, someone else raises the question, it would fall back on us for approving it that way.
No, it would be the same as when you approve stuff along McLaughlin. ODOT has final say on access and frontage improvements. It's just a different agency. We all work together. The applicant ultimately is responsible for all of this. If Metro or your own map showed this wetland is extending onto this property, that's when you guys get involved, because you can administer that. What you have to administer is a wetland that is clearly off-site, and you cannot assume that it's on his property without scientific evidence to back that up.
So then the question I'd ask you is then, in a sequence of timing, when is the Chapter 17.8 design review, when is that required?
Well, that's what we're doing right now. That's what this application is being looked at under, is 17.80, I think it is, design review. That isn't the only code section that applies, but that is in this case the master code section that gets you to the other places, such as 17.25 and 2.7.
I have 2.5 and 2.7, yeah.
Dennis, did that answer your question?
Well, I think it's all been said. I don't know if it answers it, but...
So we can make a condition that, if needed, blah, blah, blah on that, right?
I would suggest that if this does get approved, that you make a condition that it satisfy Division of State Lands. You might want to throw DEQ in there just for the heck of it, but definitely DSL, yeah, Division of State Lands.
That's that's protection for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean,
That's fine.
but by failing, I think this is a point that I don't want to spend a lot of time on here, but you have the state's going to have its own set of rules.
It does.
And even if we don't say go and get the state permit, that doesn't mean that the applicant still has to go and get the state permit. It's very wise. I think it's mostly to make sure that everybody realizes, hey, we have things that we approve that are under our jurisdiction. In most cases, there's going to be state permits, whether it's ODOT in a road issue, whether it's DSL in a wetlands issue, what have you, historic resources, that the applicant and any other applicant would still have to go through a state process, regardless of what we say.
Is there anything that, is that something that as a commission we can request, whether it be a condition or whatnot, to say we want to see that before we make any final decisions?
No, because it's not a criteria, unless it ties back to a criteria in your code, it's not one that the applicant needs to satisfy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You ready for the public?
Yeah.
So, Tammy, I think Mr. Early, thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
In regards to the little walking path that the Public Works Department requested that I include, from my perspective as a property owner, I think it's kind of silly. There's a drastic grade change from Windsor Court down to, I mean, we're talking
They drop 10 feet and 21 feet.
Exactly, 10 feet and 21 feet. So there's almost no way to make any sort of an ADA type of a scenario work. The people on Windsor Court don't want it. I honestly, as a property owner, would not want it. And I think from access for my site, for if my project gets approved, if the tenants simply can go out to the trolley trail walking path and they have access to all the buses and walking paths that they need, I don't think it's something that is beneficial for anybody. I think it's just an extra item that doesn't need to be there. That's just my thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Clay, was there did Jim provide any reasons why he wanted that added?
Yes, and I also want to comment on this, but he sent me an email today, because that's when I got all of this. The reasons Public Works recommended connecting Windsor Drive and Abernethy Court with a path for two reasons. Number one, safe routes to school. Whenever the opportunity presents itself like this one, staff will look to the proposed project for making safe routes to schools. Safe Routes to Schools is a national effort to encourage students and families to walk and bicycle to school, improving transportation safety through targeted infrastructure improvements and enforcement, walking and bicycle safety education, and encouraging programs. Number two, Gladstone Transportation System Plan, otherwise known as the TSP, currently under review, discusses connections like this one in Tech Memo 8. The TSP has had a considerable amount of public involvement, and staff is making everyone aware that this project is listed. That's what Jim Wynot wrote. Now, from your existing TSP, which is being reviewed, and it may change, may not, but it may change. Your existing TSP does not require this route. It is, however, apparently included in this tech memo for what's going on for planning, but it is not cast in stone yet. I'm not trying to talk for Jim Wynot at all, but just in response to Mr. McCarty and also the applicant here, that is a steep slipping drop right there, and you are not going to be able to get that ADA without about 400 zigzags. So just bear that in mind.
Can I add one thing too? Those 2 points that Mr. Wynot made, I can't speak to the second one. I don't know anything about that. But the first one, talking about the safe routes to school, my thought immediately went to, there's a massive wetland there, and who knows if there's some creepy dude parked in there waiting for somebody to walk, a little kid to walk by. That's just my thought. I wouldn't say that that would qualify as a safe route to school.
Okay.
I have 5 kids, so that's where my mind went on that.
Sure.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Are we ready for testimony from, is there anybody here that wants to speak in support of the application? No. You, sir, you want to speak in support?
I jumped the gun on that one.
You jumped the gun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just so excited.
Yeah, you look like it. Anybody want to speak in support of the application? And then we'll take opponents and Mr. Early, are you ready? Mr. Early is going to have 12 minutes. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening.
Thank you.
My name is Brian Early, and I'm writing again to you on behalf of our community planning group, unofficially called the Abernathy Apartment Complex Concerns. We're here to express our apprehensions and disapproval of the present development proposal. Since the last Planning Commission meeting in May, May 22nd, our group has become better organized and more mobilized with over 100 people representing our cause. I've also provided those names to you. I believe, did you get our letters?
Yeah, I think we have a list.
And I also supplied Tammy with the names of those who have, in a sense, joined in our considerations and concerns. Most of those were given to us from last go-round. So this past month, we really haven't done much in the way of recruitment, if you want to call it that, or consideration of getting out. We have had a few, but it's become significantly obvious within our neighborhoods that this kind of proposal is not favorable, and it would be very easy for us to assimilate double, quadruple the names that we presently have. It just is very clear to us in that. But most importantly, this past month, besides the mobilization and the organization, is that we've gotten better educated at what's at stake. I have researched extensively in these various ways and have greater resolve to express our concerns to oppose the proposed development. My letter to you is primarily a summary. I would let others in our group write their details and express their specific concerns that we all stand in support of. These letters and presentations will come from Britta Burdett, Steve Worsley, Jake Weiss, and Randy Thomas. We also have a video of the Olson lands that we'd like to make in this presentation. So, to make things simple, I like to keep things simple if possible, I'd like to use an illustration of the round peg in a square hole, or some of us remembered it as a round peg in a square hole, so depending on how you view it. In this case, the idea here is that we've got a square peg, the development, and a round hole, the area. And so I'd like to explain ourselves through that metaphor. The peg is the apartment development, and the designer of the peg is Casey Cutting. I have the privilege of spending time with Casey these 2 weeks ago, and we took some time to see his other building projects. And I was impressed with the work that he has done and believe that whatever he does in future development would also match the quality that I saw. Also, our time together, I recognize and believe this man to be a man of integrity and noble character. Casey's a good man, and it pains me that we aren't on the same page with this proposal. As a matter of fact, I told him, if you remember, said, I wish you were a chump, because it would make this a lot easier. So, you know, we're dealing here with a person that I believe is a good guy. I believe the development as a development could be a good development, meaning what we saw earlier in the original draft kind of left us all lacking. But what we've seen now has gotten better. But unfortunately, we do not believe this peg fits this hole. And we would hope that you as a planning commission would see the same thing that we do in the following areas of unsuitability. First, it may not fit with Olson wetlands, and we've already discussed some of that here this evening already, but please read Britta Burdett's letter carefully and listen to her presentation. We strongly believe that the wetland delineation study must occur before any consideration of development occurs. To move forward could be a terrible and possibly costly mistake that could come back to haunt anyone who approves a development without adequate knowledge of what you're dealing with the Olson wetlands. this Olson wetlands isn't your daddy's wetlands. I mean, the newness of and awareness of this wetlands in recent days is becoming apparent, especially with the Renierson Creek and the things that are going on down by the river, the Willamette River. This has taken a heightened view, and I believe that you as a planning commission have to have a heightened understanding and awareness of its potential. Having said that, we would demand that you do a delineation and a habitat study prior to any development approval. It just would seem the prudent thing to do prior to, so that if necessary, adjustments could be made for Casey's sake as well as a total revision. Secondly, we don't feel that it fits with regards to traffic. It was said at our last meeting that a traffic study is not needed with this development. We would beg to differ. Your testimony coming up will show to the contrary. Also, we believe that in the inclusion of the trolley trail alongside Abernathy Lane, you will be dealing with both present and growing future use of the trolley trail, and that has to be factored into the egress onto Abernathy Court. So we would demand a traffic study also be undertaken prior to any development of the approval. By the way, the four homes that are on Abernathy, when it was first developed, prior to its present tense of homes, the person wanted to put in an eightplex there, and part of the reasons for it being denied was the traffic impact. And now we're dealing with a much higher amount of traffic, and I believe we have some information regarding that. And also a question regarding this, and I don't know, we haven't said, at the last meeting there was a parking concern. In other words, adequate parking. I don't believe we've heard as testimony from us if your criteria has been met for necessary parking, and is there consideration is this going to have overflow parking into the adjacent neighborhood? We need to know that. But thirdly, and most importantly in our estimation, it definitely does not fit with the neighborhood. We are unapologetic about this. It does not matter if the property is zoned for high-density development. To have its egress into a residential area is absurd. If it were accessible to another thoroughfare with like kind, in other words, other apartments, that would be understandable, but not here. Please look at the houses on Abernathy Court. Do they match the development? Do the surrounding homes come close to fitting with this? The wetland and the traffic studies may or may not uncover justifiable data for no development or a modified development, but the fit into the neighborhood is a square peg in a round hole. Also, the idea of accessing a quiet neighborhood on Manor with a sidewalk just does not fit. As a planning commission, you must come to terms with these three areas as it relates to the peg in the hole: the wetlands, the traffic impact, and the neighborhood. If you don't, you will be forcing a square peg in a round hole, and the results may not be pretty. But what about creating a round peg for the round hole for a win-win situation? Our group realizes that development is inevitable. We are not opposed to development, and we're not opposed to Casey cutting. We are opposed to the wrong kind of development for this area. What would we encourage is the following. Ensure, first of all, that whatever happens with the development in its taking place does not infringe, degrade, or harm the Olson wetlands. That's a fit issue that you need to consider. Once that is determined, we propose that some form of residential development or townhouses or some other creative scenario would lower the density of development to be closer in kind to the surrounding neighborhood. The impact on traffic or infrastructure and likability with a neighborhood could create a win-win situation. Our research has determined that the city has the right to make changes in the zoning to make it suitable for all parties concerned. If KDC consents, changes can take place to make this work, and we'll hear more about that soon. Our group is ready to support this kind of consideration and would work to embrace the city and Casey to support the cause. We also talked a little bit about the idea that if it doesn't work, what could Casey do, what can we do to help? Certainly things like land swap could be a consideration, a land trust could be a consideration. In other words, we want Casey to succeed. There's no question. I don't want to see him out. So how can this work, and how can we help in that process? At present, we believe that the proposal is a win-lose proposition. Casey wins, the community loses. The wetlands could lose, safety could lose. Let's find a win-win situation. Closing thoughts for you guys. We believe that there is enough evidence for the Planning Commission to digest that an extension is requested, which is a moot point. Sounds like we're going to continue on with this. We are wondering why the clock on Casey's application was not reset when new plans were submitted last month. That seems kind of strange. Maybe we don't understand that. But when new plans are submitted, it seems like the clock should start or restart. I think that would be the right approach. Our group is in this for the long haul, and we will continue to be in it as long as the square peg is being forced into the round hole. So please, let's work together to find the right fit. Thank you.
Clay, do you want to talk about the clock thing, or actually you David?
I would suggest going through testimony first, and we can talk about that when we get to the end.
Okay. So are we ready for the presentations or the public testimony? Tammy?
Britta Burdette.
So a little bit of what I have written is kind of redundant based on the conversation that you two were having, and I was thinking maybe I should speak off the cuff instead to kind of address it, but I think it might be better if I just read this because I don't want to leave anything out, so
Could
I
you
apologize if I'm...
State your name and address for the record,
my name
please.
is Britta Burdette, and I live at 1210 Beatrice Avenue. Okay, so there are two things applied to the Olson wetland that affect the property near it. As Clay said, it's wetland and also habitat. There's only 3 locations in all of Gladstone where the same criteria applies. That's Glen Echo, Mildred Bar Park, and the Olson. And nobody has tried to do a development like this in any of those 3 locations since prior to 2009. 2009 is when Gladstone adopted the Title 13 from Metro, and as Clay said, it's 17.25 and 17.27 in Gladstone's codes. So this has never been applicable in Gladstone until now, from what I could find out. So there are kind of fairly strict regulations about what you can and cannot do within 100 feet from the boundaries of both the wetlands and the habitat. So Casey has kind of indicated he didn't think he needed to do anything pertaining to the wetland, and I don't think he realized about the habitat because he believes the wetland's at least 50 feet away. But the DSL does require the delineation report, but actually the state's requirements are actually less strict than what Gladstone has adopted from Metro, which I think maybe nobody realized. So I think you should kind of examine the 17.25 and 17.27 pretty carefully. So I agree that I think he should have done the delineation report first thing, because Gladstone law now states that he is restricted about what he can and can't do within 100 feet of the wetlands of the habitat. That's not exactly a buffer zone. It's a little bit different, and I don't have time to get into that, so I wish I did. But Metro's map does actually show that there is habitat right on his property, and that's kind of his responsibility to discount that. And if he did say what Clay suggested, which was I accept the map as is, he could actually cause problems for himself, so he might want to examine that a little bit more closely and find out where the habitat is, because Gladstone code is 17.25.020, which says that he would have to have a habitat conservation area construction plan, which would include the wetland delineation. But then, because he would be so limited in what he could do, it's specifically to do with tree removal. And his plan, his current plan, is to remove every single tree from that property, and he would not be able to do that if that habitat, if those apply. So I think there's confusion about what the wetland boundary is, because people are going by maps, and those maps are considered to be outdated. I spoke to a couple of different people at the Department of State Lands who confirmed this, that they do have to do a delineation report, which is probably going to require some soil sampling. And they said those maps are meant to be for like cursory, like preliminary plans. They're not meant to be official construction plans, so that's why I'm saying you should probably have done this already. Again, that is not a requirement, but I think it should have been. This is a precedent that we're setting here, because if it's true that nobody has tried to do a construction like this so close to these resources since prior to 2009, and this is the first time it's happening, then this is kind of the opportunity to go, okay, well, what do we need to do if this ever happens again in the future near any of these other resources? So, yeah, and I think that if you were planning on approving this without examining this stuff and making sure that he would have been required to do the habitat conservation area construction plan, then I think a law would have been broken possibly, and so I think we might want to hesitate and examine those codes really carefully before we go any further.
And,
Thank you.
I want to comment that you put a lot of work into this report that we have, and it's appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Nisha Himbaugh.
Good job.
My name is Nisha Heimbaugh. I live at 1185 Beatrice Avenue. We live across the street from the proposed apartment site. Tonight I'm presenting a short video done by Jake Weiss, who lives in Windsor Court. After failed attempts to schedule a tour with you, the Planning Commission, Jake decided to make this video to bring awareness to the wetlands.
That is.
It is, that's the one I said I saw online.
Okay, great, thank you.
Jacob Weiss.
Hello, my name is Jacob Weiss. I live at 1205 Windsor Drive. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to continue the public hearing on the proposed Abernathy Court apartments. I think maybe Casey and I found some common ground here. Since the addition of the walking path caught many off guard at the last meeting, allow me to address the history of the walking path connecting the proposed apartment complex to the Walter Park neighborhood. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's my understanding that the walking path was included by Mr. Cutting in response to a recommendation by the Public Works Department. After a dialogue that Randy Thomas had with Public Works, it was found that the recommendation was made because it is their general rule of thumb to connect cul-de-sacs and dead ends to improve pedestrian access and promote healthy activities, and to support a metro initiative called the Safe Route to School program. While I believe this notion rings true in many situations, I don't agree that it applies here, since there are already sidewalks in Walter Park neighborhood, and the closest elementary school bus stop is at the entrance to the neighborhood. The proposed walking path will do no more than create an alternative parking option for residents and visitors of the apartment complex, and put the burden on the family-oriented Walter Park neighborhood. In addition to the concerns of the affected citizens, the developer stated in his previous appearance in regards to the walking path, quote, "I honestly don't have any desire to build it," and I think he said that again today. For these reasons, I'm requesting that the Planning Commission not require the developer to include the walking path. I also want to say thanks to the residents of Gladstone who made their voices heard over the past month. There has been a resounding message that those who don't represent the best interest of Gladstone residents have no place here. As a Planning Commission, you have the power to shape the type of city that this is going to be. As house prices continue climbing in the Portland metro area, you'll be repeatedly faced with the question, who am I looking out for here? And I hope the answer is always the people of Gladstone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy Thomas.
Hello again. Randy Thomas. I live at 1430 Windsor Drive. So I was one of the late to the parties and got my information to Tammy at the last minute. So I apologize, but thank you, Tammy, for getting it in front of the council. Just want to echo my concerns from what you've heard earlier this evening, as well as there was one letter included in the packet for the pre-read that talked about the sewer and water, and so it seems like we have conflicting information about the readiness of the infrastructure to accommodate the additional units. But why I'm here is about traffic and safety. And so in my packet, and I'm not sure where it is with what you have a copy of August 11th, 1981 City Council meeting minutes and a diagram that shows Walter Park Tract A. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. As Brian mentioned, the owner of that property in the 80s wanted to develop something other than single-family homes. He was looking to develop duplexes. And there's some legalese and contracting or access issues, and the trolley trail wasn't there, and he could build duplexes outright if he was on a connector street. And so he went through the Planning Commission, the planner, and the attorney, and they determined it wasn't on a connector street, so he had to come to the Planning Commission to get a variance. That variance was approved at the Planning Commission by, I believe it was the 4 Planning Commission members that were in attendance, three were not. But then when it went to the City Council unanimously denied it, and there were 3 reasons cited, and I can share those with you, and again, you have them in front of you on the meeting minutes. The first reason was the landowner was complaining it was an odd shape and size, and it would be, he couldn't build anything, he couldn't build single-family homes there. The city council said, yes, you can. Go figure it out. The second reason was they were concerned about the increased amount of traffic that an 8-duplex units would have on Abernathy Court. Now, this is in the 1980s. Population was around 9,600. The third and final reason was that if you could have wording in an ordinance that could be changed for each request, and there would be no need to have an ordinance. So I feel that there's some level of precedent set by that city council in making the decision to deny the build for the duplex because of safety. Here we are in 2017, our population has increased, the traffic flow in Abernathy has increased, we have a trolley trail that's actively used by pedestrians, bicyclists, people with disability. I think a traffic study is more than warranted, and that is my request. I have 22 seconds. Two other quick things. The design change was mentioned. I understand at the last meeting a 3 to 2-story design change was not identified as needing a new application. Help me understand why. If there's some regulations, policies, or guidelines that tell us that, point me in that direction. We had a lot of discussion about the elevation issues, and golly geez.
Yikes.
Can I have a few more? Can I have a few more seconds, or no?
Go ahead.
It would have been really great to have that elevation information up front so we would know that the walking path would have been a zigzaggy thing. I found that out after my conversation with Jim Wynon. So feels like the design details in this package getting better. I don't think they're there where they need to be. And then finally, there's a lot of questions that get asked. How do we hear the responses, or when you have your deliberations and when you make your decisions, where is that in the process? And I think
thank you.
That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you respond to that?
I think David
let's get to the testimony first. Make a note of, make a note of that.
Stephen Worsley?
Evening. Stephen Worsley, 1060 Beatrice Avenue. I was originally going to talk about using or building single-family dwellings in multi-residential as per GMC's guidelines. You can look in 1740 and branch out from there. You got it in front of you, so I'm not going to bore you with that. One thing I do have a question about, and it was included as an appendix on my letter, is an overlay of the Title 13 resources as far as Class B, Class 2 areas that are affected by areas that if they were disturbed would affect resources nearby. If you look at that picture, Mr. Cutting's property has about 40% of any one of those given resources according to the Title 13 overlay. So I'm curious as to if he's planning on doing all this grading and whatnot, what that's going to do to affect those areas that are, if they're disturbed, are going to affect resources nearby. On top of that, his property is budding, everything, he's using every square inch of land. And as far as setbacks from the wetland, there needs to be a delineation done. I'm like I said, you have my paper. I don't need to go too far into this or beat a dead horse, but just kind of want to echo the sentiments of our group as far as that's concerned. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Bill Osborne?
Bill Osborne, 7160 Monteverde. Most of the stuff I was going to say has already been said. Some of the things that I'm not sure have been touched on. A lot of emphasis was put on that this was some of the few high-density residential area we had in Gladstone. Now, to the best of my understanding, commercial can also be used as such. I believe the Webster Monstrosity apartment complex was built on commercial, so we're not really out of high-density potentially high-density residential zoning because we do have commercial properties. I know it was also touched on the buildings that are going to possibly be built in the downtown revitalization program. If that is approved, that is also going to give us more rental units. And I don't know if I know there's traffic impact studies. I don't know if there's environmental impact studies as far as what changing this area will do. I know we don't have a lot of wetlands. That's a big issue people keep talking about. And I know the state sets certain minimum guidelines. Those are minimum guidelines. You know, we're a small community. I think that we can certainly make sure we do our best to protect any areas we have. Let's see. The other thing also is there seems to be, this design seems to be evolving as it goes along. And it doesn't seem like there is necessarily a design more than an idea. And my understanding is there doesn't have to be an exact design and architect plans to be approved here. But a little better idea on what's going on, I think, would help a lot, because every time things seem to change a little bit more and more. And then on the, I had a question for David on the legal side. Now, I know it was talked about kicking the can down the road for another month. Is that because in an appeal process, which obviously this is probably going to go to appeal regardless of the decision, at least to the city council, is it like a court process where only the evidence and things that have been put in during the hearing can be re-looked at an appeal, or can new evidence and new information be put in at the appeal?
Do you want me to address that now or do it at the end?
Go ahead and do it now.
Okay, so the code, I'd have to look back on it, but I believe the city council has the option of taking it either based on the record, so there wouldn't be any new evidence, or opening it up for additional evidence and testimony. So that's a decision, if it were appealed, the city council would have to make.
So if we move it down a month, is the idea behind that so that the residents might have time to gather more information?
No, I don't have, I think it's for both parties. I think it's a matter of when you get this much information, and frankly for the people that are going to have to make the decision, to make it informed and have an idea of what is there. There's always, in pretty much, in my experience, every development proposal to some extent, and certainly the more controversial, the more this happens, the more technical the proposal, the more this happens, where at each continued hearing, additional testimony, additional evidence is presented. And that always presents a problem for the decision maker as to, okay, I've just got this, some of it could be extremely relevant, how do I incorporate that into the decision? I just think it makes for better decisions. That's really the reason.
Okay, and as far as a decision, I hope if you guys come to one, it'll be no, as I've stated before, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, Dennis, you had, no.
There was the question was about the sewer and stormwater and the water lines that went through the now. I'm not going to speak for Jim Wynot, but I went through that with him. I specifically asked those questions, whether or not there was capacity there that's available. He did, we also spoke to the fact that there would be another fire connection, hydrant. Is it at the bottom? Is that correct?
Down in the complex.
Yeah, down in the complex, so.
On sprinklering the buildings, and I haven't got the answer whether or not the new two-story complex is intended to be sprinkled.
So the bottom line was, when we got done, he was considering looping the water to make it so it was more reliable. The water capacity, the way that I understood it was there. The storm and I've looked at the storm lines and at the storm water lines and the sewer lines, and they all have capacity. Again, I can't speak for Jim. That was my understanding when I left the conversation. Really need to take it up with him, but there didn't seem to be an issue on capacity for any of the utilities.
So, Chair Roulette, I would offer the applicant the ability to just present rebuttal tonight, and then I think we'd need to talk about the record issue.
Okay.
Okay, so there's just a couple items that I would speak to. One, the parking meets the criteria. That's 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and to benefit the parking in my complex, I'm not like a traditional apartment complex where there's 2 and 3 bedroom units. My units are all 1 and studio apartments, and so the impact is going to be greatly reduce the need for multiple parking spaces per unit, and as it sits, it meets the parking. In addition, my experience in the past has been parking is very important in any kind of a multifamily scenario, and I have worked out a plan for this complex, because they are 1 bedroom and studio units, that each apartment will be assigned 1 space, and to if a tenant wants an additional space, there'll be an additional fee involved, and so that will hold down the demand for people having multiple cars.
Can't hear? Go ahead.
Okay. So, in regards to the project itself, it meets the setbacks, it meets height requirements, it meets the as it will be designed by an engineer, it will be by requirement, it'll need to meet the amount of water that comes off of the property, the fire access, all those big questions will have to go through a review process and checklists that will guarantee that the property will meet the requirements in a condition of approval from this board if it gets to that point. And so the engineer, as I spoke before regarding the grade, if it doesn't meet the satisfaction of the fire department, then it'll need to go back to the drawing board until it does. And so they're all various different aspects of the property will also kind of fall under that same sort of an impact, where it will have to meet the conditions of approval and fit within the boundaries of that conditions of approval. So other than that, I know that there was a few mentions of, say, the trees, and in one letter that I saw from the previous meeting, prior to the previous meeting, there was a description of a stand of fir trees. Well, it's 3 or maybe 4 fir trees, and it's right at the entrance of my property, and I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe 1 or 2 of those are actually in the public right-of-way where the road goes. So, and the rest of the trees on the property really aren't anything of substance. There's just some miscellaneous trees that the property hasn't been taken care of very well. It was in the same family for 40 or 50 years, I'm not quite sure, but it's all overgrown, and I'm going to try to make something nice out of the property. So, do you have any questions?
Questions?
I do. Mr. Cutting, and these may be addressed to Clay too, but since we're working off a May 16th meeting document and a number of things have changed, there's some comments in here specifically relating to parking that this issue should be discussed. And I'm going to digress just for a second here from your property to some that I'm familiar with in my neighborhood. I live off Webster Road in Charlotte Heights, and on the north side of Charlotte Drive there are 2 apartment complexes that were there when we moved in 35 years ago. They both had off-street parking, both were just fine. Now both sides of Webster Road are lined with cars. that are either visiting or live in those units. And it's not a terrible thing, because Webster Road's kind of a semi-main thoroughfare. There's a lot of places for those cars to park. They're not in the neighborhood. They're not parking in front of anybody else's houses except the units that they live in. It's not the case in your neighborhood where you're planning to build, and I have real concerns about spaces. I mean, how you decide to handle your tenants in terms of charging for parking doesn't have anything to do with me, but I can see how it would force people out onto parking on public streets instead of paying for a second parking space. I question how many parking spaces you'd have assigned for visitors. You have a number of garages shown on the drawing, and again, this is observational data only, no big study or anything, but as I drive around, most garages are used as storage units. They're not used to put cars in. So I think it's, again, I have questions about that. And it says in here that the Planning Commission should discuss this issue. So I don't know if anybody else has the same concerns or feelings that I do, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
So when the original plot map or the site map was created, there was a misinterpretation on my part where I was under the understanding, because I've done projects elsewhere, where a garage and a space right behind it counted for 2 parking spaces. And after a discussion with Clay, I became aware of the fact that if there's a parking space behind a garage, you only get to count the parking space behind the garage because they're in tandem. Or in some jurisdictions, it's potentially that counts as 2 parking spaces. So prior to last month's meeting, I had a revised, and it's in the binder that I supplied to you, that we revised the site map to correct that issue. So we now, as of the last month's meeting, prior to the last month's meeting, it meets the criteria of 1.5 spaces per unit.
Oh, yeah, my grade school math is that's 75 parking spaces for 50 units. And if you're going to allot 1 per unit, you'd have 25 for visitors or for rental to
correct,
as a second location for if 2 people are in a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay,
correct. And you know, I would agree, and I have had countless conversations with the county staff about the density, and I'm trying to work within the boundaries that the code sets forth, and I've really labored over trying to figure out a design that would work really well and meet the requirements. And I always come back to, oh man, I got to meet the density. That's the big thing, and you know, from my point of view, I've worked on this for 3 years, and as Brian early spoke, we spent a fair amount of time together. We talked on the phone, and you know, the bottom line is there's been some people reaching out to me. Well, why don't you build houses on it? Well, the problem is that if I build houses on it, then I have to do a subdivision, and I'm in the process of doing a subdivision right now, and it's taken 2 years. And as I explained to him, if I were to take 2 years to then build, and then I'd have to build a city street, I'd have it'd be harder and more time consuming for less of a return. So I've already put my 3 years in, and I just want to move on with my project, and
I'm not trying to stop your project. I just want to make sure you have enough places to put cars. And,
well,
and you explained it. You're within the parameters.
I'm within the parameters, yeah. But unfortunately, you know, there's been, as Mr. Early spoke to me, you know, there's like a duplex scenario, and then it bumps up to the higher density, and my property fits in the higher density, and I'm trying to fit those parameters, and I'm trying to find the best design, the best scenario that I can do. I went down to the 1-bedroom in the studios, and I've gone down to the 2-story units, and I'm trying really hard to keep the impact as low as I can on the site.
I have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
we got a lot of comments talking about what you want or what you're willing to do, et cetera, but I'd rather just ask you directly. So, you just made a comment that you didn't want to do this, but you feel like you had to. What is it you actually wanted to do?
Well, my ideal thought was to maybe knock down the density as far as the unit count, maybe 20%, and do lower, maybe 40 units, and it would be a little cozier but the reality is that we're talking about when it's I don't know, Clay could speak to this, and the city attorney could, but I don't think it's within your jurisdiction to change the comprehensive plan, and I don't. It could take years, and it's all up in the air. It's not a scenario where just because everybody wants it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And I'm not in a position, or financially or emotionally, to wait 3 or more years to go through that process. And I just need to move forward with what I have.
I have a couple of comments and a question. I understand the situation you're in, and it's easy for us to start deciding that we can do things that aren't going to fly, and that'll waste a lot of time. The property was zoned so that if you were to build 3-story apartments, which I'm not suggesting, how many units, what was the maximum number?
The maximum number is 63.
I want to reiterate that. And the minimum that you could build?
Is 50, which is, I'm at the bare minimum.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but Metro and the state comes to your community and does a population growth projection. They do it for the whole region. And I'm not going to be long-winded, but I want to make sure I'm right about this and that everyone in the room understands this. So when they come to our city and say, you need to make room for 5,000 more people in the next 10 years, true, they're not mandating the density, but they're saying to you, you've got to make a comprehensive plan. You've got to fit them in somewhere. You've got to make it work. So in order for this to be rezoned or changed, it would require a comprehensive plan change. Is that not correct?
That's my understanding.
Trying to get too far in the weeds.
You've got an
there.
application in front of you for design review for
Right.
apartments, which is a use allowed outright in the zone. If Mr. Cutting wants to come in with an application for a single-family residential subdivision, the answer would be a very quick no, because that zone doesn't allow it. He could, however, apply for a zone change, which in this case would also require a comprehensive plan change, which would require multiple hearings before you folks as well as City Council. That is a big deal, but that's an option for anyone. But right now, you have an application in front of you, very specific, that needs to be decided on. You can't redesign the project.
Exactly.
I have a question. You know about the 120-day thing, and that includes the appeal to City Council if there is one. Would you know that you can extend that? You can ask for that to be extended? So in other words, we have dates that we have to meet, but do you know that you can extend those dates? You can ask for an extension of that time?
Yeah, it sounds like we're already going to a third meeting, and so from my perspective, from waiting the 3 years that I've held the property and trying to figure out what to do with it, and to keep kicking the can down the road, I would prefer to just move forward. And
okay.
Yeah,
I just was that you know that you could extend that.
Yeah.
And I think part of the concern was that the initial application was this,
right,
and this one, is totally different. So that's kind of, I think, a lot of concern.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Mr. Cutting, would you agree to a 1-month extension? I do think that the sheriff's point is well taken in terms of some of this information. I don't think anybody would expect you to say sure, no deadline, but in order to, if the commission tonight were to say, okay, with the additional information that was presented, we want to have a time for that plus what might come in to look at that come July, right? We're in June still. That basically, if we follow that process, would be a decision, and only if people came back in July, we come back in July, all they're going to be doing is deliberating and coming up with a decision based on evidence that we've received tonight and that we could receive during that period.
And if we could get, like, if you'd be willing to, like, incorporate some of these things into another similar type of thing like this, I think it'd be a lot easier for everyone to figure, digest all that, exclude some of the things that we talked about possibly. But, I think the concern is that it was so changing. We've had such, we're inundated with all this new data.
Yeah, I honestly, I prefer to just move forward.
With the time frames that we have.
Can I just throw some dates out there? Then you have the city has until August 16th to make final decision on this, and that includes any appeal that may or may not happen. And I think what the chair is trying to get at here is, if we extend this another month, that's going to be pretty tight if it gets appealed to City Council to get it to them, even for a single hearing, and get a decision out of them by August 16th. So just bear that in mind. And if you were to give an extra 30 days, that would just put a little buffer on the back end there, just in case. But regardless, as it stands now, you have until August 16th. If you go into July, I can't see that calendar there, but it's the third
18th.
Tuesday. 18th, so that gives you less than a month then. Actually, no, because it'll take a couple of days to get written decisions out. The written decision probably won't even be mailed till the following Monday, which is at the 24th. And so that gets you to, no, is that?
Yes,
24th. How the hell can I see that? Well, okay, so 24th.
12-day appeal period, right?
And so that gets you to the 36th. Or about the 5th, the 5th of August to appeal it, and then we have to have a hearing before August 16th.
When is the city council meeting? It's the second Tuesday in August. What date is that?
I couldn't get notice out.
15th.
I couldn't get notice out.
August 8th. The second Tuesday is August 8th.
The first is a Tuesday, so you're early.
There's not time for notice.
Yeah, I think then you're left. If we don't have another 30 days, I think you're looking at probably making a decision tonight. I mean, I think that's sort of what you're left with.
Okay.
Even if we don't feel we have enough educated information to be able to make a definitive decision?
Well, that could be the basis for you saying, if you can articulate where that disconnect is, that could be the basis for denying it.
Okay. Clay, I want to clarify for in my mind, you said certain studies aren't mandated or required. I have some serious concerns about the wetlands and what construction and all sorts of things and how it can impact it. Not being an expert on it, I really would feel more comfortable if we had more time to find out information, which I don't have the knowledge of.
The best information you have is what's available to you. There is no other information out there. So unless someone gathered it for you...
I would feel more comfortable with a study. I really would.
And I'm thinking that you don't have the authority to require it.
Okay.
It may well be something that would make you feel more comfortable.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I don't think you can require it. That'd be up to the applicant to offer to help you.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions?
Speaking to you've been on hotspot all day. When I looked at the whole package, I saw three basic issues. One was wetlands and other things that were outside of your property. And there's a tremendous amount of concern, which in itself creates a huge amount of emotion that's why you had so many people, I'm sure, showed up last time as well as tonight. Parking was one of those things, and then the visual effect of it. I don't think anybody's arguing whether or not the property can be developed in a way that is suitable, is because of if people understand how far down it sits, that it really is an obstruction to anything in the neighborhood. It isn't visual for the most part, and by the time you modify the property to get the grade for the road, you'll end up dropping the buildings down anyway, which would raise the property on the other end, which backfills part of the area which abuts the wetland area, or whatever you want to call it. It's also been called the Olson City Parkland as well. I read that online as well. Anyway, that piece of property, raising that up would help. And would you consider, if not doing the delineation study, would you consider committing to I realize these are required by code down the road in the planning, when you get to the building and planning process for that, well, not the permit process, but for the actual drawings themselves. But I think we need to have some clarification on how you would intend to provide erosion control. We don't want mitigation, because that's after the fact. That means something's already gone wrong. So we're talking about erosion control. Would you be amenable to committing to, and then it does require you to do that anyway, but for the sake of everybody here, he is required to meet the standards, and erosion control is one of those standards, and that is one of the few things, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's one of the things that is really strictly adhered to when they have an erosion control program.
Well, everything is strictly adhered to when it comes to building and site development, but your drainage section, that's recently been updated. David, maybe you can help me, but it's within the last 6 or 8 years. I don't know. It's 10 years, relatively recent. It meets current codes, but yes, it is put on. It's just a condition of development.
Yeah. So those things will be met, and there are huge financial implications for the owner if they violate those in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, the object would be to not have anything go wrong, because then we fall into the category of mitigation. And that, again, creates all different kinds of problems there, and then you get lawsuits. So, you're wanting an answer tonight is what I get, if possible.
Well, obviously, yeah. So there's several factors. One, as I expressed, I've had this property for 3 years, and I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with the best design, but there's also financial considerations on my part, and if we're doing a month extension, it just gets me further down the road, and interest rates are rising. I have to look at the whole big picture. Interest rates are rising. The further into that we extend things, the further into the winter I get, and that's assuming that I'm able to put the financing package together. But ideally, yeah, I would love to have a decision. I just don't like the idea. From my perspective, I don't see a benefit to extending it, because all it does is, I understand everybody's got the not in my backyard scenario, and I totally get that, and I wish there was a different scenario and I was out in the middle of nowhere and there was no houses around me and I could just do my project, but unfortunately that's not the case. I've got a piece of property and I need to do something with it, and the longer, from my perspective, the longer we go, the more opposition there is. So that's just.
So if there's no further testimony, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
You have to make a motion.
I make a motion to close the hearing, public hearing.
I'll second that.
Still voice on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. Thank you.
There was one opposed.
Sorry?
One opposed.
Okay, Mr. McCarty. So, what's the pleasure of the commission?
I would like to actually make a comment, mostly for the public's benefit. Most of you have already figured out that, we have to follow the codes. I personally, walking the property, if I was living there, I would not like to see it go away, and would not like to see the greenery go away. That's not a consideration I can consider. It's not up to me to consider whether the greenery, the view is acceptable. That's not something we can consider in our codes. As far as the DSL and the DEQ, I would love to be able to require those up front, but the fact is that all we can do is require that those are accepted and by the DSL and DEQ are passed before anything is done on the property. We cannot require that they're done prior to coming to us. It's maybe unfortunate, but that's the way the rules are written. The same thing with the environmental impact study. I personally would love to see an environmental impact study or 3D height elevations or a lot of that stuff, but we cannot require that. Maybe at some point, once we redo some of the codes, we could start requiring those, but our codes currently do not allow us to require those things. And the same is possibly true for the traffic study, to be honest. The traffic studies have been told that we've been told that there are certain cases, certain criteria that has to be met before a traffic study is required, and we've been told by staff that we do not meet that criteria to require it. Would I like to see one? I definitely would like to see one, but we can't necessarily require one. So I just wanted to make that comment that while I know a lot of you feel like we can make a lot of decisions, we can change the ordinances and all that up here, we cannot do that as part of this process. And that's unfortunate, I understand, but that's where we are.
So, let's discuss and see where we are on this.
I would say that if it was approved, I personally would like to override Public Works and remove that walking path. Looking at it earlier, I don't see any way, say, a wheelchair would be able to get down that hill in a reasonable fashion without a lot of extra field.
I also think that I agree with you about that cut through not being a good idea. Plus, the city has already given up cut-throughs that already existed and have not made other ones. So I don't think there's a need for it, and I would agree with what you said, that we'd recommend that it not happen.
I agree with that. I also agree.
I mean, there's obviously some concerns about the trees. Is there anything we can do for that?
Well, I think, for me, I think a lot of the concern has to do with not having an adequate time to digest all of this and really look at, a design review process when this thing is like in constant change. So I've got a problem with just the amount of information and the chance to really do a proper design review with elevations and all the stuff that
landscaping and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I agree.
It does seem like the changes that have been made to be more accommodating, though. It's not like he's doing changes just because it'll be cheaper to do this or, easier to do that. That he's actually doing changes to make be more appeasing to the people that are going to feel the most impact from it.
And I realized that I was going to follow up on that exact point in terms of, I know there was a question about, when is it a new application, when isn't it? And generally speaking, there's not a definition for this, even in state law. It's not like it says it is a new application when. There have been a few cases out there that have dealt with this issue, and generally speaking, the way that the LUBA and the courts have looked at it is to say if you're going to be proposing something, let's say it's a little easier to describe in like a commercial zone context. If you proposed one use and you went through that, and you went through a hearing, and then at the next hearing you came back and said, you know what, I'm no longer going to do a car wash, I want to do a, retail pad, something. Then I think in a situation like that, the courts would say, sure, the city can say, well, you know, you've really got a new application here, and you need to reapply. And the reason being is what they really would look at is, you know, what are the fundamental impacts that are going to result from one use or another, and how much different would those impacts be if there are changes to what's proposed. Here you're talking about, you know, something that went from 3 stories to 2. It's remained multifamily the whole time. It's not as if he went from, not that he could in this case, but, you know, 10 single-family homes to a multifamily unit with a multifamily building with 50 units. I mean, so it's a degree of the change, and there isn't a bright line. But I think in this case, you know, consistent with what I generally see in these types of situations, you have an applicant that's for whether you think it's better or worse, attempting to respond to some of those concerns.
Okay.
I wouldn't think it's a new application.
I see less writing.
Comments? Anybody have ideas about things they want to see or not see?
I'd still like to ask the question. I know maybe I just am dense up here, but from the council's point, what are the criteria for rejecting the application? Is there a criteria on the table that we've talked about that allows us to reject it, or is it, as Clay says, they've met all the criteria and we have no choice?
Well, I mean, you can disagree with staff's interpretation of if the criteria have been met. So you'd need to look and say, is there evidence that's been presented that would say, I disagree with Clay's staff report. I actually think that this relevant criteria has not been met. So in that sense, sure, but it's not as if there's a criteria out there that we, you know, haven't addressed that would say, oh yeah, by the way, you know, you'd be able to deny it for this reason.
Yeah. Yes, and the motion doesn't work.
No, a motion does not work. In fact, that gets to Chair Roulette's comment about being a, you know, quasi-judicial setting. And the law looks at you as judges here, and you're expected to rule on this based on
our current codes and
on
ordinances.
facts and what the code says. Yep.
And we don't have authority to request certain reports.
Well, and I think that's you know, I mean, this is probably cold comfort, but I mean, that's a lot of times through these processes, whether you approve something or deny something, you start to realize, wait a minute, there's some parts of our code that we'd really want to change. You know, I mean, I remember we talked about this in the context of another application, I think. But you know, right now, a lot of cities will have standards that would say, let's say, like for traffic, taking that as an example. Again, cold comfort. This isn't applicable here. But you know, you might have a local street, and we talk about local streets as having average daily trips. And typically, on a local street, and traffic engineers are going to differ about this, but a local jurisdiction can say, okay, you know, we want our local streets to not have any more than, you know, X daily trips, 1,200 daily trips, 1,500 days. Those are fairly common numbers in my experience. Anything above that, if you present an application and those numbers are going to be higher than that, you, applicant, have to do a traffic study and come up with a way to mitigate that somehow, and that might be spelled out in the code or in the transportation system plan. As far as I know, the Gladstone's plan and its code don't have a standard like that, which would say, you know, at this level, you need to do a traffic study.
So, Commissioners, is there anything that you see that stands out as not complete?
I did, but I don't now. I mean, Clay's made the point that met all the criteria. Is that correct? I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
I keep hearing my name. Now this is a design review application, and these folks have looked at several design review applications over the last few months. You got like the 24-hour fitness building, the law office building, the OLCC store. And during discussion in the meetings, the hearings we held on those, you weren't wondering if you could deny those. It was what's this going to look like? Does parking meet numbers? Is circulation going to work? What kind of building materials? That kind of thing. There was never discussion of, is this really allowed? It's already been, the 24-hour fitness is allowed there. The code already says it's allowed there. You're kind of stuck with this here. Your code says apartments are allowed there. It is subject to design review, and the standard subject that 17.80 makes these applications subject to, which gets you to several other sections of the code, including 17.25 and 17.27. However, you're starting from the point of this use is allowed if it meets these standards. It's not a conditional use, which has much more objective criteria that have to be met, and a conditional use is much more likely to be denied because the criteria are different. You have to meet thresholds to get that approved. With a design review, it's already assumed. You just have to meet the design standards and that kind of thing, and I think that's where you're stuck here. It's just really hard to deny this.
What if we did deny it? What happens then?
Well, then that's the final decision unless it gets appealed. And then if it gets appealed, it goes to City Council, because that's the first appeal. City Council is final city authority, but it can be appealed many levels above the city. Luba would be the next one, and then you'd have to start begging and asking, but then I think you go to the Court of Appeals, and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. Probably wouldn't make it there.
I don't think it would make it.
But that would be the top level. Things can be appealed for a while. Typically, once they get out of the local level, that's it, because money becomes a factor. But it's possible. Let's just say let's say you make a decision on this tonight, yay or nay. It's possible that no matter what that decision is, it's going to get appealed.
That's my thought.
And then it goes to City Council, and they have to do the same thing you're doing right now.
Discussion?
Well, stuff has been said, like you said, against it. Is it allowable for me to say one of the things that I see is positive about this? Is that allowable? Honestly, I don't know. I'm seriously asking.
We're discussing the application based on, what's submitted, so I think it'd be appropriate if you see something in the application that you like.
Okay. Well, then I do see something that I like in the application. I like the idea that it's going to be studio and 1 bedroom, which will be less expensive for people starting out, that there'll be a place where our children or grandchildren might conceivably be able to live closer to us than having to go out to Oregon City or Southeast Portland or something like that. I also think as far as the traffic goes, back in the 80s, there's a lot less traffic, so adding an extra 30 cars would be a big deal. Now there's an awful lot of traffic. I know it sounds kind of like perverse, but there's already so much traffic that adding another 50 cars is not going to be quite as much of an impact in the way that I logically would conclude. But I do just think it's really neat to have studio apartments. I think the time has come that studio apartments are great ideas.
Now the hearing's closed at this point.
Commissioners?
I'd like some clarification regarding the conversations about mapping and delineation. Based on what I'm hearing here, there's no reason or validity for us to require that. That's in terms of delineating the wetland as part of the application.
We're not authorized.
But my question is, and I'm not here to debate the map, but the question really is, at what point do we know where the wetlands truly are? Because I'm hearing conflicting opinions about that, and we need facts, not opinions, no insults intended. And is there a criteria that we can require to address that uncertainty? I know ultimately Mr. Cutting's project will have to meet it, but it just seems a little gray here as to impacts on habitat and wetland, and as somebody that's owned similar property, I think it's real important that we're clear about that, because that's the one thing that might be a deal killer if we're not straight about it.
If the information you had available to you, if the information that I had available to me showed any part of the wetland or the habitat conservation area on this property, we would be having a completely different discussion. That's when all sorts of things kick in. No information that I have shows the wetland or the habitat conservation area on this property.
And you said that earlier, and I just wanted to clarify that.
And to clarify, we have had that on previous applications, and we have gone through that process.
Several times. Yeah. No, this is not new. The habitat conservation area, the Title III and the Title 13 has been used several times here in Gladstone. Most recently for the 24-hour fitness. Yep.
Clay, if I may, I think Commissioner Malachi and some folks in the audience have spoken against this walking path. Is there a way to approve this and eliminating the walking path?
So the reason for it being added has not yet been approved by City Council. I think that's justification enough that we could choose to override it, right?
It's simply a recommendation at this point from your Public Works Director. As far as I know, that's what I can tell from what the discussion's been. I'm not aware of any criteria that requires it. I think it was done for a very good reason.
Yeah.
But I don't know of any legal reason why it needs to be there.
And based on Jim Wynot's email, it is something that they're looking at. But again, I just happen to have a copy of the transportation system plan right here. It is not included in that.
Next week.
It's not.
No.
But we could add, take that out, right? I mean, we can just, somebody made a motion to approve the hearing and delete that as a requirement.
I'm not an engineer, but I honestly don't see how that could reasonably be done, because it would have to be built to ADA standards.
Yeah. So do we, what current criteria have we added to this application at this point?
Have we added?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I know we added the before expiration earlier.
But you're talking about conditions.
Oh, okay, okay.
Sorry, conditions.
Well,
do we have any others that we've added?
I would suggest 17.25, the habitat conservation area, just as an extra measure to have the map verification process done. Now, remember that map verification process includes as an option that the applicant accept the mapped area as it is, which shows it as being off the property, but we need to formalize that somehow.
Okay.
Somebody needs to make a motion.
Yes. Here we are.
Changed my mind.
You changed your mind?
Yeah.
Go ahead, make the motion.
No, I changed my mind to not make it.
Oh. Maybe your last motion to make. Come on.
So, just to list them out for you, Clay, the current conditions, as I understand them, would be 1, that we add the before expiration, 2, that we add the map verification process for 1725, 3, that we require the DSL and DEQ before starting anything on the property, right? Also, we are going to recommend, agreed, that we remove the recommended connector walking path from the list of requirements. Is there anything else?
I think you've done it. You've covered everything.
You got the map delineation, the mapping exercise.
Map verification and the DSL and DEQ ones, yeah. Is there any others?
I think you've covered them.
I think that's all we can do, yeah.
And while we can't require it, I would like to also add a recommendation that they consider a traffic study. But we can't, obviously...
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Although we can't require it, I would like to recommend that they consider doing a traffic study. Because I think that would help alleviate concerns for the community. Anybody, any comments on that?
I would second that.
Is that a motion?
First, he's going to make a motion.
So, I'm sorry, I know a lot of people, almost everybody in this room is not going to be in agreement, but I recommend that we approve file Z0236-17-D with the criteria that the conditions we just specified, and also remind everybody that this isn't the end of the process.
I second your motion.
Call roll, please.
Commissioner McCarty?
No.
Commissioner Natalie Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Malachi?
Yes.
Commissioner Poole?
A hesitant yes.
Commissioner Wentz?
Yes.
Commissioner Patrick Smith?
Yes.
Chair Rowlett?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-1.
Can I
6-1, excuse me.
Can I point out a process real quick here?
Yes.
What'll happen is the written decision will be in the mail probably by Monday, and the 12-day appeal period starts on the date of mailing. So whatever that whatever that happens to be. Everybody within the 250-foot notice distance will get a copy of the decision. Everyone who has testified at either of these hearings will also get a copy of the decision. So if you are both, you'll get 2 copies. And anybody who's been a party to this can appeal it. Appeal is to City Council. And if you're going to appeal it, it needs to be appealed within the appeal period, which is going to be clearly noted on that decision, all right?
15 days, actually.
Excuse me, 15 days. 15 days from the date of the mailing of the decision. And I think the mailing will probably be Monday. It isn't up to me, but I think it'll be Monday. But regardless, whatever date it gets postmarked, that's when that 15-day clock starts. Then if it gets appealed, then it gets scheduled for City Council out about a month. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take about a 5-minute recess. So anyway, let's go back online and wrap this up.
Okay.
So is everybody ready?
Can I, you have more work for tonight?
We're in discussion, so go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to talk about next month's hearing, but if you're not ready for that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm glad you got this decision done, because we've got a pretty busy meeting coming up next month. We've got the cell tower thing, which I put off a month because of this one tonight.
Is that the one over here?
At the high school.
Oh.
Yeah, it's actually, based on your new ordinance language and what you talked about when they tried to site it along Portland Avenue on the power pole. This is in response to that.
Those don't generate a lot of public comments.
No, not in Gladstone. But anyway, that's just for the heck of it. That's coming, and you've also got a design review for a pretty big remodel for one of the car lots on McLaughlin. And now I forgot, there's a third one.
So I think actually I'd like to clarify.
Portland Avenue plan. What is that?
Are you looking at that?
So I think I'd like to just clarify for everybody else up here. So what happened last time is we had telecommunication tower come before us. People wanted us to change the rules for it, and like tonight we said we couldn't do that because that's not part of the application process. And after that decision was made, then we went through and actually changed the rules, and then I think it actually even got appealed, but it expired. So that's why they're before us. And now they have to comply with the new rules because it expired.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the new rules, so I'll have to look at that for sure.
David did it. Basically what he did is he lifted Salem's, near as I can tell.
Yeah. He did it for Salem.
And the council the commission put up with me for a few months, was it?
That was a robust discussion, yes.
Robust, I like that. Lively, that's
all I had.
Lively.
Thanks, bye.
Spicy.
In the code books that I have, does it have the new?
It does online, I think.
Okay, so I'll need to look at it online. Okay.
Discussion?
Hey, Randy, I was thinking that,
Oh, well, Tammy, did you wanna?
Madam
Just some old business. Hello, Tammy Stemple. Do I need to give my home address?
I think you can just say mayor.
Mayor?
It's up to them.
Okay, so I'm only talking about this because Malachi brought it up. After tonight, it's painfully clear that we need to review our codes and ordinances. We started that process a couple of years ago. We got partially through it, and we had no clear guidance from City Council. So I think it's probably time that you guys look at it again, and I can guarantee you that you would get full support from City Council. There's state and local resources that can help pull that together, and they'll hold your hand and walk you through the whole process, but I think it's time.
Did you get a grant?
Yes,
We
that
did,
was
we
my
did,
question.
yes.
No, I know. I thought we had.
We
secured
applied
one.
for it, but then we didn't get clear guidance from council, so we just let it lapse.
It was was it a TGM? Do you remember?
Yep, TGM grant, so it's through Laura Buell, if she's still with the state of Oregon. If not, we can find out who the right person is, but
You guys
it's-
are due for it.
yeah, it's
Yeah, we're
completely
seriously due for
available,
it.
and it's so overdue.
So do you think we could have a work session with, maybe you could put together and we could just like sit down and just go over everything before can we do that without a public hearing? Can we have a
So
work
it's
session?
gonna
Just
take
to do
a
a
lot
work
of
plan. You're talking about coming up with a work plan?
Well, just come up with a work session to say, this is what we need to do, and here's the things that we need to do before we...
Identify the areas.
Yeah.
in the-
Right, we
Yeah,
can do that
outline the
without
areas
having a
that we need
public
to
hearing.
revise.
can't
When
we?
you say public hearing, you mean like inviting testimony? Or do you mean like having a noticed meeting that the public
Right.
can come to?
Public.
Which,
Right.
the former or the latter?
Well-
It's going to be a public meeting, so you'll have to notice it, you'll have to
Okay,
allow for people
so
to
we'd have to have a
attend.
notice, just have a work session?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a public meeting. So you'll have to allow people to observe, attend, listen. You
But that's
do
no
not
big deal.
need to allow for a hearing in the sense of presenting evidence and
What
testimony.
we normally did is we did it as part of our normal meeting.
Yep, we put, I think, a little bit of time afterwards
Usually.
or before,
Yeah.
and we actually broke the codes and ordinances up into sections so that we would just dive in deep on small pieces, and we had copies of what we had existing, and everybody had a month to review it, and then we come together and, with like minds and come up with a
So I think
a
that's a good
revision.
idea, so we could do the 5:30 thing in our regularly scheduled meetings, and then I think for me, the first thing I would like to see is just like, here's what I think we need to do,
Mhm.
and this is how we're going to do it, without getting into any of the...
Right, you just want a work plan.
Right.
You want a
Just
plan
come
on
up
how
with
to
an
move
idea
forward.
of what you need.
How we're gonna attack this.
Yeah.
I
That's
think,
what I would...
I think one part that might be helpful is pointing out which sections of the code are under our jurisdiction and which parts are not. I think that might be helpful.
Well, all of them are under our jurisdiction. It's just the Title
The planning
17 stuff
commission.
has to go.
Right.
Yeah,
I would recommend you don't do anything besides Title 17.
well, we did.
I know,
but
and
we
I
were
think
gonna
that's-
lump it all together.
I think that's part of maybe, I think whenever it comes to, it's hard enough to rewrite one code chapter.
Well, but
right?
if you break it up, the way we were attacking it is we were gonna do Title 17 in pieces, but then lump the decisions together for one public notice.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I thought I took Malachi's comment to
The
mean, like,
the
what
reason
about
I-
the nuisance section? What about other parts of the
The reason
code
I
that you
brought it
really
up-
don't
Oh,
administer?
yeah, those parts are municipal, that's...
Yeah, I mean, the reason I brought it up is there are certain, if somebody just goes to the website and looks at our code, they would think there are things in there that we could actually affect here, and that's not the case.
No.
The charter, for example, looks like it's part of our code.
No, there was...
Right, so yeah, I think it just need to be clear, like, which sections we're gonna even be considering.
And we have that, and
Yeah.
I don't remember where I have a copy of it, but Malachi, you probably have a copy of that
Might be
somewhere.
my email.
In the interest also of, I mean, not that Clay and his group couldn't do a great job, but really in the interest of cost and time, I highly recommend trying to get another TGM grant.
Yeah.
That's the way these projects can get done and delivered within a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, and I
Otherwise,
think it was like
it's really hard.
$130,000, something like that.
Lot of work.
that-
And is there a firm that actually does the work?
It
and
was
then-
for the
Yeah,
state.
there's a-
Okay.
But they contracted out to a couple, different planning firms that would, under their watch, state's watch.
And they have access to all the different counties and cities and stuff, so they can
Yeah, I mean, who
give
would
us
be-
examples to
Scott-
review.
I
And
Scott
think
is one
the
that does a
smart
lot of
growth
it,
was the code that they were
right?
really wanting us to
Yeah.
look at.
Yeah, the state, I think they have a good pool of people that they would work
Yeah.
with.
I think that would be wonderful, because I think we'd end up with a really professional new set of codes.
Easy to read, and I think it's very timely now with all of our master plans, our transportation system plan,
Especially.
Portland Avenue. It would be nice to solidify that into codes and ordinances.
The only other thing, and without getting in the weeds, because it is truly something you want to just have a plan. I would suspect that if you go that route and you get somebody on board who's going to look at code updates, they are going to be looking also at the comp plan, which in and of
that
itself
was part of it too.
it was.
Yeah, we were also going to be
Okay.
looking
Well,
at the comp
that
plan.
makes me feel better because you've got a very, very, very old comp.
Yeah, no, that was part of it.
And
was
also
comp
the
plan.
potential changes to the zoning code are limited to, in many cases, by plan language.
Correct.
So, and my push was to do the plan first. I know that you were looking at doing it all
Put it
together.
together so that we had the direct adjacencies, otherwise it would get really confusing. So that's why we should, whoever you want in this work session, come up with a plan of attack and really think it through, because it's
very
a
much
tool that
needed.
we need.
Question, when you get a grant typically, and this is, maybe there isn't an answer right now, but on a TGM grant, I think we need to make sure we know what the fine print is. With money comes a certain amount of
Strings.
direction, but also trade-offs and a certain amount of, well, this is how we're doing things, so this is how it needs to go in Gladstone. And I just think we need to be very, very careful about what the citizens are hearing, and that they're all informed, and that we're hungry, we want to do something, so I'm not being negative. I'm trying to say we don't want to be desperate, we don't want to be in a hurry. At the same time, we need to make some things happen. So I'm not here to dampen anything, I'm just here to say, read the fine print, be careful about what we're agreeing to, and I'll do my best to be part of it, by all means. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Didn't you do a portion of this before just recently?
Couple years ago, yeah.
Are any of those still valid?
There were some that we really got into the weeds.
Can we build on it?
We can find it. If I can find it, we just kind of got a little frustrated because
You weren't getting any support.
we weren't getting any support. So
Work.
we did do a lot of work. Yeah, I'm sure we can find it somewhere.
What would you need from Planning Commission to move forward on trying to obtain another grant so that we could... Pardon?
A TGM. I can talk to Jackie, Tammy, and we can pull it together. I've got the contact names. Clay may know who I need to talk to. I'm sure it's still Laura. She's still down at the state.
As far as I know it is, and if you need any help, we have people, they do a lot of this, writing
Perfect.
grants. So,
No, you're...
Speaking to that, actually, especially because of what happened last time, it might be worthwhile for us to have a designated rep in the city, whether it's staff or council, that is, I guess, point person for any of the grant writing stuff. Not necessarily the person to do all the work, but at least the person who we would go to with questions or comments or anything.
Okay. We can ask
because
Jackie.
I know last time there was questions about who was responsible for the grants. So.
Yeah.
A point person.
So I guess I'll talk to Jackie and she can come up with an idea of how we can proceed with this one. But I think it's obvious we need to do
And
it.
if Jackie or Tammy Bannock need any support from us, count me in. It's very much needed right now, especially with what we want to move forward with on. We need to have it clear so that not only we know what we're doing and how we're making our decisions, but that the citizens know as well.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other business?
I do not, Chair Rowlett.
So there are open positions in City Council right now. If anybody's interested, they should consider applying. And I believe the deadline is the 17th, I think.
All right, anything else?
I think we're good.
Let's adjourn.